VenomousStare coming at you with another Venomous Classic. That's a retro StarCraft 2 game in case you were wondering. This time we have two legends of the game for completely different reasons. One of them a top tier GSL caliber macro Protoss from Korea. The other one an abrasive loudmouth guide maker with lots of notoriety within the community. And can you read that? It says Parting. Yes, it does. Parting is going to be the Korean representative, and he's going to be facing off against Kombat X, Wasif Khan, EZ. Of course, if you don't know who Kombat X is, he's extraordinarily abrasive, quite the character, but as you're going to see in this best of 3, played at WCG, which was a nationalistic regional tournament where players would first play against the other best players from their own country, and then after they would play that tournament, the very top players would go to a finals and play the other best players from their respected countries. And of course Korea just sends 4 absolute legends, one of them of course being Parting, and this is him right here. And if you don't know who Parting is, he's absolutely top tier. He's one of the best Protoss players to ever touch the game, and that's not being hyperbolic at all. He was the inventor and pioneer of the Soul Train build, the 7-gate +1 Immortal Century push versus Zerg, that really helped cement him as a legend of the game and help him win tournaments in this area in 2012 when Zerg was dominant. Parting also had excellent PvT. He's facing off against the Canadian Kombat X, the demonstrative, bad-mannering shit-talker from Canada. This guy has a YouTube channel, I think it's like Wasif1121, but he made guide videos, and they're actually pretty informative and good, and you can see that he got first place in his Canadian group, which back then there were good players in Canada, and you know, there still are good players in Canada. Scarlet, Astoji, and others. Kane. But Kombat has his hoodie on here. He has his headset with the terrible mic. Fun fact, I actually had that headset and did a review on it because of how terrible the mic was. And there's this famous clip of Kombat X Skyping within Control, and there's horrible mic noise throughout, and it's actually because of that headset. Anyway, Kombat's going to be facing off against Parting here in a PvP best of 3. This is in the round of 8 of WCG. There he is throwing the smile up, Kombat EZ. So if you don't know who Kombat is, I might actually advise you to pause, hit Control T to open a new tab, and watch some of his games. Because, you know, when I say, oh, Parting's a top tier Korean macro turn, you kind of know what that entails. Like his builds are really clean, his micro's really good. You need to go see what Kombat X tells his opponents. I mean, he said some really vile things to people. And I'm a guy who really thinks you can say pretty much anything, but Kombat is definitely taking it to bad manner standards, and we can see the classic Daybreak LE is going to be on the docket here. Classic map, one of those Fighting Spirit-esque, completely balanced, play me on it to prove you're better type maps, and this is a best of 3. So look up Kombat X vs Idra Epic BM game. I can just link it in the description, but it's on a channel called Inappropriate Banana, I believe. And I mean, Kombat, he really runs his mouth, and he cleaned up his act towards the end of his career, but he always liked to talk shit. And he was a specific rival with EG in Control, who he really, really hated, and in Control disliked him just as much. But here we go into the game on Daybreak. This is Startail Parting, the infallible macro Protoss with exceptionally crisp micro, who also plays a hell of a macro game, and then Kombat X, the notoriously cheesy loudmouth from Canada. Kombat X is actually famous for his cannon rushes, so much so that he's nicknamed his cannons Combat Cannons. I would go as far as to say that if you look at Protoss players, and especially historically in Wings of Liberty when Cannon Rush was really popular, and we see Kombat already chatting it up here, I'm your #1 fan, but I beat you. Kombat known to talk, but I'm sure on the LAN he's not going to get crazy like he does online, maybe just a bit of banter, and that's completely fine. And Parting isn't one of these Koreans who is very reserved. He's a funny, demonstrative guy who likes to banter back and forth, kind of like MC was. If you're familiar with MC, formerly Iron in Brood War, although if you don't know who MC was, there was no way you would know. He used to go by Iron, so. Both players are opening with Gateway, and I think it's interesting to note that both players did peek around their man, and we can see that, look at Parting, the red toss in the bottom left, he's scouting around. He knows that Kombat X has a penchant for cheesing, and if you don't know what he's doing, he's looking for proxy gates. 10-10 gate was more popular, proxy I should say. The thing is back in the Wings of Liberty era you started with like 6 workers, so saying things like 10-10 gate is weird because if you start with 12 supply, people are going to be like, well, how do you go 10-10 gate? Well, back then when you started with 6 supply, you would go out, build a pylon across the map, and hide 2 gateways. But Kombat's not doing that. It looks like he's going for a macro game, actually, as of course he has a gate and a cyber core in his base. Kombat's adding on another gateway. So, oh, he's actually oh, he traps the probe there, and I would expect a smiley to come out here from Kombat. 1 down, there it is in the Parting. Ooh, flashes a smile. I love that. 20 to go. And this is a great thing about having players that talk. And maybe you could say, yeah, CombatEx did take it over the line maybe a few times online. But the crux of the issue is that having a little bit of banter in the game makes it so much more interesting. And that thing that Kespa did of really harping on not letting players ever talk, I think made the game less interesting. So Parting is a worker down, and this has to be concerning because obviously if you're scouting around for proxy gateways, and of course 10-10 gate is when you build a pylon and then just hide 2 gates. It's the standard, you know, super cheesy proxy 2 gate nonsense. But whenever you go out and you look for someone trying to hide gateways on you, it kind of means that you're worried, especially about cheese specifically or sneaky play. So after seeing 2 gateways and then having his probe die, I would venture to say that Parting is perhaps a little bit worried here. But he's going for Robo, so this is a standard conservative safe play. This allows you to get your observer out. Of course that blocks against DTs and allows you to scout and see what they're doing. It's hard to go wrong with Robo in general with Protoss in pretty much any matchup. As you know, even modern day in Legacy of the Void, it's very, very strong. Observers are one of the most powerful things in the game. I think a lot of new players underestimate that. Yeah, make multiple observers. Even if they die, make more. And we see a little micro battle as Parting has a Zealot and 2 Stalkers. But of course the 2 Stalkers are further back and he might have tricked Kombat. And Kombat has a Zealot of his own. And Parting's Zealot is very low. Kombat picks it off and here's Kombat with a 3rd Stalker. And Parting is in this weird position where he's trying to get back to his base, but he can't really do it. And the quality is a little bit bad here because it's from 2012, so it's not supremely easy to see whose units are who. So you'll have to bear with me. And this is something that Kombat was famous for. He would actually put his proxy pylon probe on patrol. Now, this sort of I don't feel like this is bad. Oh, Kombat talking a little shit, saying scared, and remember, there was no mothership core back in this time. So having your probe patrolling means that there is a chance that Parting could glimpse it. Like if Parting had walked over to make a Nexus, he would have seen it. Speaking of Nexuses, Kombat's is already halfway done. Probe in the main of Parting, and Parting's probably saying, are you serious? He literally went Robo off of 2 gates and was just playing safe. And I'm sure Parting's going to see the expo and be pretty surprised. Boom, says Kombat. And that is interesting. So I think this is one of the things that is really, here we go, is the probe is going to get scouted here and destroyed, which is actually bad. And Parting's base goes up as soon as that dies. Interesting that Parting killed that before making the expansion. He even moved all of his units back to do that. That just goes to show how important concealing and giving away information is. Sometimes you want to intentionally give your opponent information to deceive them. That's why I said concealing and giving away. Kombat's proxy pylon is going to be stopped. Oh, and 2 Zealots are going to be trapped here by 4 beautiful force fields. And Parting really probably has the best force field micro out of any toss. And there's a close-up of Kombat. He's saying, okay, I'm gonna bring my Zealots over. Easy! Easy! Of course, Kombat's expansion did finish first. Parting's is still being built. And mind games here. From the very outset, we see Parting very wary of cheese. Obviously, Kombat X's reputation precedes him. So, Parting played very conservative, stayed on one base, made a bunch of sentries, which is very gas-heavy when you're on one base, and eventually had to take a much later expo. So, Kombat X is ahead, and this is the difference between someone who can only cheese and has a reputation as like, oh yeah, that guy only cheeses, and someone who can actually play both ways, but really, you know, kind of prefers to cheese. But we're going to see how Kombat plays. Looks like he's taking a quick third here. This is pretty quick for PvP. Kombat has always been a fan of hiding expansions or aggressively expanding. Oftentimes he'll do a very polarizing attack, like with a bunch of Zealots with charge and then double expand behind it. He's an unorthodox player, he's a creative player, and he's an abusive player. He's very fun to watch. He's not the kind of guy to do standard things and these very plain, boring transitions. I recall watching a Kombat X guide video for Protoss vs. Protoss in the Wings of Liberty era, where he advised to attempt a cannon rush against, you know, behind the mineral line of your opponent, and if that failed, proxy 5 gateways, and if that failed, proxy 2 stargates and go void rays. Now this is the kind of player that we're dealing with here, and he's trying to play a macro game against a guy who won DreamHack, against a guy who, you know, would go on to win a Home Story Cup, a BWC, and of course Parting did very well in GSLs. He was consistently in Code S and made it very far. He was considered top tier by many, including Artosis, who, if you know anything about StarCraft, you should trust the word of Artosis. So Parting is moving out here with the nice little 2-base push, and I'm really worried for Kombat. He's trying to take a third, and this is really cutting down on the amount of units that he had. And this is a popular thing in PvP where people would push out with one Colossus, a couple of Mortal, but the Colossus is used to break force fields. Kombat's very spread out here, but here's a few force fields. Oh, beautiful force fields from Parting, as a lot of Kombat's army gets cut off. Kombat's army was really far arced out. And look at this, Parting ran in, do a lot of damage, and look at this, he's segmenting off the army as though it was a Zerg army. Beautiful force fields, very little overlap, and Kombat supply keeps going down. 2 more beautiful force fields, and with the Colossus out, it's extraordinarily hard to engage. Look at how difficult that is for Kombat, and Kombat is being manhandled here by the Korean toss. This is a best of 3, remember. Kombat coming down with some charge lots, but he took so much damage because of the force fields. Oh, and Parting talking some shit, basically saying, are you crying? That's what TT means if you weren't aware of that somehow. Indeed, to Gosu GG. So Kombat X forced to GG. And there he is, he's saying, okay, wow, I wasn't expecting to be force fielded that brutally, and Parting saying, okay. This foreigner guy was talking a lot of shit. He tried to macro, and where were his units? I don't even think Parting knew that he had a third, which is why Kombat had so few units. So to Parting, that probably seemed like, well, what the hell was this shitty foreigner doing? But Kombat had his hand in the cookie jar, and it's interesting to me that Parting was in that position, that conservative, okay, I'm a little bit behind, I'm going to make my Colossus and try to push and do damage. He was in that position because he was afraid of Kombat's reputation as a cheeser, played super conservative, got behind, and there's Kombat thinking, okay, I lost game 1, I got a little bit ahead, but there was this one really crushing engagement, and I lost, and I had speed Zealots. So Kombat doing a little bit of mental gymnastics there, probably with a lot of profanity and EZs mixed in. As I'm going to take a sip of water here. Second map is going to be Antiga Shipyard. This one, of course, is a classic. Not classic enough that I need to talk about it before the match, though. Let's be real. Okay. So Combat Easy is down here bottom left, and in the top right his devastatingly dexterous opponent, Startail Parting. But we're still on Kombat X in the bottom left. This is what really sucks about not observing. And I love how they're just like going on and on and on. But here we go. Here's Parting. And this was a weird map because there were these bizarro positions. It's not really for PvP so much, but against Terran, you could spawn at any of the 4 locations, and you would be in a spot where your third base would be under siege tank duress from their main. And it was just kind of bizarre. And this map, Antiga Shipyard, it's pretty much like 3 pretty safe bases, and then it's super hard to take a 4th. You almost just have to wheel out all the way to another main. But this is PvP, it rarely goes beyond 2 bases. Of course, PvP in Wings of Liberty was much more volatile. No mothership core, no oracles to tag. You had to research, hallucinate, for God's sake. Scouting and hiding information was a big part of this matchup. Gateway here for combat, so no cannon rush. Just a gateway and a pylon. Same from Parting, so a standard opening here. So let's talk about Kombat X a little bit since we have a lull in the gameplay. Remember, of course, there were 6 workers back then. You didn't start with 12, you didn't get this sort of instantaneous, okay, we're 50 seconds in, let's see what he's doing. As the Cybercore just now finishes, Warp Gate's on the way. One of the most difficult things was whenever they changed the way the minutes worked, because originally it was like normal minutes, like 60 seconds to a minute, you know, like how normal time is kept. Wasn't the way that it was in StarCraft, because that's how the seconds were on normal, but the game was always played in faster on the game speed, so it was like 41 in-game seconds was a minute or something goofy. So what you had was when Legacy came out, it screwed up all the timings. It used to have memorized like, oh yeah, 2 minutes was when he would have this, this, and this, but that was completely reset. Personally, I found that to be one of the most arduous things to relearn. Build order wise, we have a Twilight Council from Parting. Blink was very popular in this time period. Of course, the way that people like to use Blink, as we see a micro fight going on, is Combat isn't afraid to range out and be aggressive. He considers himself to have exceptional micro. And again, we see him getting a slight advantage in the early game. Parting is one of these Protoss players who has scary micro. He can really rip you apart with it and make you look silly. And Combat's going to range up the ramp here, and I don't know about this one because Parting's going to be able to get off so many shots. And Combat sort of thinks better of it, doesn't take any hull damage. Parting, of course, getting a Robo and Blink. Now, if you don't know why, well, with no mothership core, you have to have high ground vision to blink up into the main. Kombat X intelligently killing the pylon behind the natural of Parting, but Kombat trying to kill the pylon, but also wants to zone out the stalkers. He has a zealot to try to do that. More stalkers being warped in on the low ground, and we see Parting gets exactly what he wants. Traps the EZ Protoss, as I like to call him. And Kombat doesn't even get the pylon. So essentially what you saw happen right there was Parting was waiting for his warp gate to kick in, and as soon as that happened, he had that instant power spike where he could get that numbers advantage. And because the warp in was 4 seconds everywhere, you didn't have to have a gateway connected to the pylon. Parting insta-warped in those stalkers, got a huge numbers advantage, And really, like three stalkers is a huge numbers advantage when it's stalker versus stalker. Every little bit counts in a mirror matchup specifically. But Kombat is a very sneaky player. He managed to sneak in a pylon, and Parting probably has no idea that's over there because of the fact that he has a pylon behind his mineral line already, and judging by the fact that he saw Kombat try to hide one last game on Daybreak, he probably knows that it's coming and thinks that he's safe because he put a pylon of his own up there. And Immortal's out for Kombat, but with Blink Stalkers, Parting is going to be in a good position. The thing is, once you get two Immortals, they do so much upfront damage. It kind of renders Blink a little bit, not useless, but not as good. This is why I don't say useless, because one of the best things about Blink is the mobility. We can see Parting blinking up into the main, but all it takes is that one little gunshot from the Immortal to chase it away. And of course, the strength of Blink is the mobility. Immortals are good in a straight up fight, but with Blink, you can run in, attack, and then get away. We can see Kombat warping in Zealots and bringing up the probe and just getting butchered in the natural while he does it. But Kombat does have a slight numbers advantage here. He's microing very well, and the Immortals have started to save the probes at the natural. Panning back to the main of Parting, we can see that he's trying to defend the harassment of Kombat and warping in more Zealots. So remember, Parting's on one base, guys. Parting is at a little bit of a disadvantage here. Kombat can double pump workers. Kombat also continuing to warp in Zealots offensively. We can see it's about 4-4, and two individual little fights going on. Probes being pulled as every little bit counts, especially in a mirror. More Zealots being warped in for Kombat, and the healthy ones reaching up and leading the charge forward first. Epic music being played. Kombat ripping forward here. The top tier Korean Protoss is at a numbers disadvantage, and I'm not talking about just the bases, as here is Kombat Easy of Clan X pressuring forward. The guy who loves to run his mouth to both Idra, Destiny, and In Control. Kombat's running forward with the Zealots here. He has to micro well. He can't have Zealots attack buildings. Parting still trying to warp in here, but he's at a big economy disadvantage, a big supply disadvantage, and Kombat X microed very well. What up? Oh, Kombat Easy knows it. Am I actually winning? The top tier Korean toss is in trouble here. I'm as shocked as you. Look at him. He's typing out. Look at him. He's ashamed. GG. Kombat takes it. It's 1-1. All right, Parting's like, holy shit, I just lost to Kombat X. Look at him. Oh, he's pumped. Kombat knows it. He's like, I knew I had it in me. Okay, game 3. Yeah, map 3. What's it going to be? I'm putting the hoodie back on. He's going to channel Carmelo Anthony. He's like, what map? He thinks, what did I do against In Control when it mattered? Of course, one of the games that I casted very first on this channel was the Hilarious Combat given the throat slash. It was between Kombat X and In Control. Bitter rivals. And In Control won 3-1. But the one game that Kombat won was Proxy Gateways. And it was on this map, Ohana LE. So here we go, the third and final game between Kombat X and Parting. And look at that, a probe moving out. As that guy came in there with the little clipboard, he was like, hey, Kombat X, what map do you want to play with all the marbles? And Kombat's thinking easy. He's got the hoodie on. He's got the headset on. And he's always been an advocate of cheese. He's not afraid to break it out. And he's certainly not going to shy away against one of the best players ever. And I guarantee there it is, as Chris Christie would say. So this is a pretty common proxy spot, because what happens is they move out to go straight to your base if they're going to scout, and they just never peek around their own third. It's just not a place where they go, really. So this is going to be the classic 10-10 gate that I spoke about at the beginning of the cast. There's the first gate. So essentially what Kombat X is looking to do here is, with his two proxy gateways, double pump and chrono boost Zealots, assuming that Parting is going to go for one gateway, one cyber core. And look at this, Parting's actually scouting for the double gateway cheese, because he knows that Kombat is someone who's fond of this, and this is very exciting. This is the cat and mouse information hiding part of StarCraft 2 that's so important, and looks like Parting's going to go back in his base, as there were a couple of proxy spots back at the natural. I think you could hide a pylon on the low ground. Also back in this era, you could hide pylons on low ground and proxy structures up on high grounds. There was a really popular game where Combat did this against Huck on Zelnaga Caverns, but it actually is interesting that Parting's taking double gas here. He's not going for a conservative sort of 2 gateway play, and this is what Combat wants. Parting wants a cyber core here. He's obviously trying to tech up quickly, taking double gas, and Combat's going to have the unit advantage here, pumping 2 zealots, and this is going to come down to pure micro, ladies and gentlemen, as Combat loves these cheesy micro situations. He drops the good luck right before he runs in with the proxy. Oh my god, I love it. And here's the zealot pylon combo, and Parting, remember, he's top tier Gosu level at micro, so this is going to be excellent. As the zealot comes out, Combat's in trouble. He has a huge numbers disadvantage. As the other zealot starts to come out, Kombat X running around, he can't get caught up, he can't get split. As the zealots start to duel, and look at that, here comes another zealot. As Kombat, oh, he loses it. That's so bad for the Kombat toss. Easy'd there. As the zealot for Parting is still alive, and the other zealot is going to be surrounded, and as soon as you lose one, it's such a disadvantage, because every bit of this is about a numbers game and a race against the clock, because we see a stalker out here, a range unit, and Combat had to have the numbers advantage so he could take the straight up fight and work his way up to the stalker. And look at this huge hold of the initial push. As Combat, Parting drop and see you, basically telling he's easy. As Combat knows he's insanely far behind, as another stalker's out here. I'm not going to say Combat's dead in the water, but what you just saw was an excellent defense. Parting got in the way like the Dallas Cowboys offensive line, separating the 2 zealots with his probes, forcing one of the zealots to duel with one of his zealots, while he focused the other one with his probes, and allowing him to get a stalker out was that maneuver. And he's going to kill the proxy gates, and it looks like Combat's going to try to wall in with cannons, as of course this is the deciding game, and this is Kombat X. He's not going to leave after a failed cheese. He's going to try to stretch it out. I would suspect that, look, I'll be honest, if those gateways weren't killed, Combat probably would have tried to reproxy more gates out there. But Parting does snuff out the proxy. Anytime you get proxy gated and you want to kill your opponent, kill the pylon for the proxy gates and then go kill him, because you don't want to get backstabbed when you move out. Parting is building these offensive pylons, 4 warpins. Remember, these are 4-second warpins. 2 cannons are at the top of the ramp of Combat. So it is interesting to me that Combat was trying to play a macro game in Game 1, got ahead, and it was actually Parting being the sort of, granted he played really conservative, but it was Parting's aggressive move that dealt the killing blow. And this is also something that new players, BM me and make proxy nexus, please. So this is like low-key begging, like low-key begging for mercy here by Kombat X, as he wants Parting to screw around and maybe risk losing it. So this is another thing that you could do in Wings of Liberty, was warp in on the high ground. And if you never had to play against this, you don't realize how ridiculous this was. But okay, GG, good luck rest eternity, you're good. So Combat taps out there. So what Parting did there basically was got a pylon at the, oh, he's saying, okay, get out. Yeah, you won a game. I'm not going to go crazy, but okay, let's be real for a moment. And Combat's saying, shit, I almost had it. If I hadn't gotten out microed there at the beginning, I can't believe I put it all on the line. He took double gas and I still lost. That is at least what I would be thinking if I was Kombat X. And you know what's funny? Combat's going to run over here and be really good manner to Parting. Like, hey, you played really well, that was good, Michael. Look at that! Even somewhat of a hug there. She's saying, like, okay, do you want to pick Ohana again? He's like, yeah, I like proxy gates on that map. He's saying, like, oh, that was such good micro. And Parting's like, yeah, you're easy. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this cast. It's always nice to see Kombat X. And it's interesting to me how absolutely loathed and hated this guy is. And the fact that he went toe-to-toe with the top-tier Korean pro gamer is something that I think is kind of interesting and shouldn't be lost and history, no matter what channel gets taken down. So subscribe for more.